All right, so let's talk about Guilty Gear a little bit, okay? I'm not on the one hand, you know, one thing I accept as an adult fighting gamer is that there's a limit to how much OG experience matters. On the one hand, OG experience does not matter that much, right? This is one thing we have to accept. You know, all of us who started fighting games with Street Fighter 2, we're all a little older now, right? And the best Guilty Gear Strive players are not the original Guilty Gear players anymore. So like the top Guilty Gear players in America and in, you know, Japan for Strive, some of the OGs are okay, but it's mostly new players now, right? Like the person who won the official ArcSys tournament in Japan, his name is Blood Mummy. He's like 22 years old, around there. So young blood is definitely dominating the scene, and that's a good thing, right? That's what we want to happen. We want to see amazing matches, like where, you know, in Street Fighter you have like Sako fighting like Higuchi. It's like Sako could literally be the guy's dad, you know what I mean? Like that kind of age difference. And then you can still have a really good match with a high level of play. So that's what's really interesting about fighting games now, is you have, you know, 42-year-old Sako or whatever fighting 16, 17-year-old Higuchi, and it can still be an amazing match. But that having been said, I am the most OG Guilty Gear player in America that still plays Guilty Gear today. So let's talk about why. So the reason I was the first Guilty Gear player, serious Guilty Gear player in America, is because Austin, my hometown, was the only arcade that got the game when it was new. So first of all, the very, very first Guilty Gear game was released on PlayStation. So nobody touched that game, okay? The game was basically like, it was essentially like a concept, like a design. It was a minimum viable product, all right? So Guilty Gear on PlayStation was not touched by anybody who played fighting games seriously, because there was no arcade version. It was just a console game. And you have to, if you're not an old man, you have to turn on your old man thinking hat, okay? In this generation, in the early 2000s and late 90s, if a fighting game was console exclusive, that meant it was garbage. All right? So it's the same thing as when, you know, back in the day, if there's a movie and the movie comes out and it goes straight to DVD or straight to VHS, you know it's going to be garbage, right? So same exact thing. So if the game came out on console and console only and there's no arcade version, the game was dead on arrival. It was garbage. All right? So nobody played the first Guilty Gear. All right, so now we understand first Guilty Gear came out on PlayStation, you know, around this time, like early 2000s, late 90s, I don't know. Nobody played it because it wasn't an arcade game. All right? So, okay, second Guilty Gear was Guilty Gear X. And Guilty Gear X was unique because Guilty Gear X had an arcade version. And Guilty Gear X also came out during the time of Dreamcast. So Dreamcast was released like in year 2000. I believe Guilty Gear X came out in 2001. Okay, PS1 GG 1998. So I was pretty close. I knew it was like late 90s, early 2000s. So I think GGX came out in 2001. I might be wrong about that. But I think it was around 2000 and 2001. And because it came out on arcade, and because Dreamcast was out, it came out for Dreamcast at the same time. So Guilty Gear X was one of those games that had a simultaneous arcade and Dreamcast release. It might not have been exactly simultaneous, but it was within a couple of months. And so, you know, like many others at the time, because in year 2000, I'm a freshman in university, okay? And I had Guilty Gear X on Dreamcast because, you know, Dreamcast games were easy to acquire if you had an internet connection at the time. So I had Guilty Gear X, I messed around with it on console, but of course I didn't take it seriously. But then one of our local arcades in Austin got Guilty Gear X arcade version. So they actually got the arcade board imported from Japan. And it was only available as an import. It was not available as a US version arcade board. So it had to be imported. And it was so popular, that arcade, that they got a second copy. So they had 2 copies of Guilty Gear X in my local arcade. And the Austin arcade was the only arcade in America that got Guilty Gear X arcade version. So because it had an arcade version, and because it was available at my local arcade in Austin, that was when I started playing Guilty Gear seriously. And so all the rest of America, they were still playing like Third Strike, they were playing Super Turbo, they were playing Alpha 3, right? All these other games were still popular at the time in US. But nobody was playing Guilty Gear X except for us in Austin. So we were the first in America to play this game seriously. So I'm out of those original players who played Guilty Gear X in arcades in Austin, I'm the only one remaining. So I remember all the other Guilty Gear X players at that time. They all quit. None of them play fighting games anymore. Okay, so now let's look at the next step. The next step was after Guilty Gear X, Guilty Gear XX came out. So this was the sequel to Guilty Gear X. Guilty Gear XX was the first version of Guilty Gear that more Americans started playing, because Guilty Gear XX had a much wider arcade release and way more arcades got it. So when Guilty Gear XX came out, I'm already a Guilty Gear, I've already been playing Guilty Gear for years. So I quickly became one of the best in Texas at Guilty Gear XX, because most other people were brand new to the game and to the series, but I already had 2 or 3 years of experience. And so I started playing XX. I played Zappa was my character in XX. And when Guilty Gear XX was coming out of all these arcades, that's when people started saying, oh, this should be a tournament game. This should be an Evo game. Like, it should be at all the majors now. So, okay, great, right? So I was playing Zappa, and on fighting game forums at the time, everyone was saying Zappa is low tier. Like, Zappa is garbage, low tier character. Why did they even put him in the game? He sucks. Nobody can win with this character, seriously. And at that time, some people in Texas had been playing with me already. So they knew that Zappa was not weak, because I was winning all the tournaments in Texas. So somebody posted online and was like, hey, there's this young guy in Texas. He plays Zappa. He's pretty good, right? Like, and I even came in and posted in the forum. I said, I don't think Zappa is that bad. Like, I'm doing pretty well with him. I don't really think he has that many weaknesses. So anyway, this boiled down into a huge, pissing contest, right? So like West Coast, East Coast. By the way, West Coast and East Coast, they both started with XX. None of them played X, okay? They both started with XX. They're talking shit to us, the city that had experience with the series before. And they're saying, you guys are garbage from Texas. You don't know anything. You suck at fighting games, right? All that stuff. And so the next major that happened after this thread was a tournament in Nebraska, in Omaha. It was called Midwest Championships. So a lot of people were saying, okay, well, Midwest Championships, it's going to be like the decider, right? To see if the shit talk is really true or not. Because it was kind of a neutral territory, right? So Texas had to travel for it. California had to travel for it. And it was mostly California and New Jersey, tri-state area, talking the most shit. But anyway, all the top California players went to this tournament, and then all of us from Texas went to this tournament. And of course, if you know the history, you know what happens. I won that tournament. I got first place. I won the tournament. Midwest Championships 2003. I won first place with Zappa, the alleged low-tier character. Second place was a Faust player from California. He was pretty good. His name was Sin. He was a Marvel 2 player as well. And that was why a lot of people thought this guy was going to win the tournament, because he played Faust, who was considered a top-tier character in the game. And he was a Marvel 2 player. He was a top Marvel 2 player. And people thought that the Marvel 2, strategy would carry over to Guilty Gear quite well. But anyway, I completely rocked that guy, okay? And all the excuses came out, like, you know, the joystick was messed up, like, didn't know the matchup, you know, he's doing stuff I never seen before, right? All the excuses came out. But anyway, I never, in my history of life, I've never seen a tournament thread where the tone changed so quickly. Because in that tournament thread afterwards, everyone shut up. We shut the entire country up. Everyone shut up. Because you know who got third place in that tournament? Was David Him from Houston. David Him was a top player of every fighting game at the time. David Him is also a legend. At the first Evo, David Him got 9th place in all 3 main events. So in Capcom vs. SNK, in Super Turbo, and in Marvel 2. He got 9th place in all 3 tournaments. So this is a very talented, like, multi-fighting game player from Texas. And so he got 3rd place with Johnny. So out of the top 3, top 2 is from Texas. We proved everybody wrong. You know, justice prevailed. And so now there's just one more part to the story. So at this point in time, 2003, Marn still does not play Guilty Gear. Okay? And there's a reason that Marn still does not play Guilty Gear at this time. The reason that Marn does not play Guilty Gear at this time is because he's 11 years old. Alright? Because in 2003, Marn is only 11. He's born in like 1992 or something. Or 91. So he's mega young at this time. So the first time that I played Marn in Guilty Gear, he was my friend's little brother. My friend Tuan, who's closer to my age. And Tuan was a Third Strike player from Houston. He played Makoto. So Tuan's little brother, this little 12-year-old brat kid, I would go to Tuan's house to play games with him. And the little brother, the little 12-year-old brother, little Marn, was like, let's play Guilty Gear. Fubardak, let's play Guilty Gear. Right? So anyway, I would play Guilty Gear with him. And at this time, like, he would just grind over and over, right? And he didn't care how many times he lost. So I would literally, we played a set where I beat him 100-0. Right? Because he's 12. He's a little kid. He doesn't know what he's doing. So I beat him like 100-0 in Guilty Gear XX on console version, on Dreamcast. Or Dreamcast or PS2, I don't remember. And I was like, hey, Tuan, your little brother's trash. Ha ha ha. You know, like, Marn sucks. He had a different forum name at the time before he became Marn, because Marn is an abbreviation of Marnito, because he liked Magneto in Marvel 2. So it was, he had some other name which I forgot, and then his new SRK name was Marnito, and then that got shortened to just Marn. So at that time, when he's 12 years old, he wasn't even Marnito yet. He still had some other, like, some other name. But anyway, so around 2004-ish, I guess, 2003, 2004, I think it was 2003 maybe, was when Reload came out, Guilty Gear Reloads. So Guilty Gear XX Reload comes out, and right around that time was when a lot of the Japanese arcades started to upload videos of the matches at the arcades. So this is still before YouTube. But what happened was that Marn was the first person, Marn is definitely the first person in America that got good by watching other people's videos. Because this was a new phenomenon on the internet. You could download the matches from Japan. You could see exactly how the players were playing at this arcade in Kyoto called Acho. So Acho was the first tournament in Japan that started uploading their matches to their website. So Marn was just downloading every single match. He watched every single match like several times. And, you know, he just watched over and over and kept grinding. And then all of a sudden, he went from like 0 to hero. So in Guilty Gear XX, he basically never won anything. He went 0-2 in like every tournament. And then Guilty Gear Reload came out. And he started playing Eddie. And he was watching videos of like, you know, like Ogawa and like all these top Eddie players that were playing in Kyoto at this famous arcade. And I just remember suddenly like Guilty Gear Reload came out, and then he won some tournament. And I was like, what? This little brat who I used to beat 100-0 is like winning a tournament now? Like, what the heck is happening? And I played him, and he got a lot better. And so by this time, he's like 14 years old. So that transition from like 12 to 14, he got really, really strong. So that was truly like a zero to hero moment. But yeah, the time that the most players started coming into Guilty Gear was around reload timing. So most of the people now that people refer to as OGs in Guilty Gear, most of them started around reload. So like, for example, like Kugi and Kinji and like Final Showdown, like a lot of these players who are considered like super OGs of Guilty Gear, they mostly started during reload. Flash Metroid too. Flash Metroid started with reload, because his first game was Guilty Gear. So anyway, now you know the true story. The true story, which you'll only hear on twitch.tv/fuberduck. I was the first. Everyone else came afterwards. So now you know.